Hello, and welcome to Bitesized Expertise, where renowned experts lead the way and lead their expertise. I'm Elif Kocaoglu Ulbrich from Contextual Solutions, and today I'm hosting Ussal Sahbaz from Istanbul, one of my favorite cities in the world. Welcome, Ussal. How are you? You're muted.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. We are often together in conferences, at events, and it's also great to have share this session with you because I know that you have very deep expertise, especially when it comes to government relations, regulations, and lobbying. And today we are here to extract this information and tips from you. So thanks a lot for being here.
Pleasure.
So let's kick it off with, the burning question, Ussal, because, there's a lot of stigma about or around the word lobbying, actually. So everyone assumes that lobbying is something only illegitimate business owners do. But as we know, it's not like that. It's actually useful for all types of businesses. What is lobbying and how does it work?
Indeed, I think in the US, it sounds a bit more legitimate than compared to us Europeans. When we say lobbying, it really sounds something illegitimate, whereas it is not, because actually, obviously, in any business, there are illegitimate things, right? But properly conducted, lobbying is actually closing the information gap of the policymakers vis-a-vis the industries that they are regulating. In any case, of course, the industry actors, whatever industry it is, know more about their business compared to the policymakers. This is the nature of doing business, right? You know your business more than I do your business, and this is the same for everyone. But policymakers actually decide on the critical things, sometimes the most critical things about the businesses, how they can, grow, how they can, distribute things, how they can advertise, a lot of things. Especially in more regulated industries like finance, which you are an expert on, this is even more so. So actually, you need to close this information gap, and conveying this information from the businesses to the policymakers is generally called lobbying. Uh, we also call it the government affairs or dialogue with the government, which may sound more legitimate, but it is the same thing. And I think it is one of the critical, functions in a democracy because it actually enriches the information environment in which the decision makers operate in.
Well, that's an excellent summary. So the way I understand it, lobbying becomes more critical when the business model or the technology behind that business is less known, right? So the newer you
Exactly.
are, the more important it is.
Exactly. And that's actually how I started my consultancy 5 years ago. I decided to specifically focus on technology companies and the new business models. My first client was EasyCo, which is now a part of Naspers. It's a fintech company in Turkey, and it grew from there. Because when it comes to the technology businesses, actually this information asymmetry is even higher. If you're talking about a traditional business, let's say if you are lobbying for the Barbers Association, everyone is going to a barber, right? So you have an idea. I mean, you may not be able to conduct it, but you know how it works. You know the dynamics. You see it every day. But in technology, it's different. It's new business models, new types of conducting business. Sometimes it looks very mysterious to the policymakers. Of course, there is a generational gap as well. Most of the policymakers in all of our countries are older than the entrepreneurs. Sometimes they even don't use those technologies at all. So the need for lobbying is actually higher. There is also a different side of this medallion. I think, especially in technology businesses, because it has emerged so fastly, the founders, the owners of the businesses, are also very much away from foreigners to stakeholder relationships, establishing or relations with the policymakers, talking to policymakers. It's a different world for them. So for both sides, actually, you need a bridge, and that bridge is generally filled by lobbyists like myself.
Interesting. I mean, indeed, it sounds scary, especially if you're a startup, or if I think about the entrepreneurs that I work with or, mentored in the past, they're like 20-year-old, really brilliant guys, really brilliant girls, really trying to change the world. But then they have, for instance, maybe no prior work experience or no government relations experience. They don't know even how to write a petition or go to court, right? So then this becomes like an additional layer of complication because you don't know how these things work, and it just sounds scary.
Exactly. And what I advise to all the entrepreneurs, either they are in a regulated industry or soon to be regulated industry, because in all the industries, if it becomes large enough, if there is enough impact on the society, then the regulation comes. Or I mean, let's say you are in a regulated industry or not, you have to have a plan from the very beginning on, potential regulatory risks on your business. They might be existing laws or laws that can come later on, depending on the push of certain, lobbying groups, certain, traditional industries, certain segments of the society that are negatively impacted by your business. It can, or the old-fashioned reactions of the policymakers. These all may be the case, and you should have a plan, and you should monitor these developments very closely. This is, I think, the first aspect of lobbying: risk assessment and monitoring. Second aspect is obviously access and transmitting your messages. Transmitting your messages can take different shapes. In the US, it's more direct. So the businessman or the lobbyists talk to the decision makers. In Europe, it is more through certain business organizations, chambers, NGOs that that becomes the voice of businesses. Or you can also utilize certain thought leaders, universities, impact assessments, those kind of tools to convey your thoughts and your potential or existing benefits to the society to the decision makers. This is the second part. And all of these things actually serves to your business model, or should serve to your business model, enabling or keeping your business model alive, which in turn hopefully will also have a positive impact on the society.
Mm-hmm. And indeed, you can actually, turn back the clock and maybe, make some changes more, advantageous for your business, right? Because sometimes the regulators don't know, like you said, and don't understand the business, and then they try to prevent before understanding it. And if you, engage in lobbying beforehand, you can actually prevent, or at least, make your own impact on the regulation.
Exactly.
Or the
But in most cases, as you have observed, I think in the last 10 or 15 years, the technology and the business model go much faster than the regulations. I mean, the best case is obviously Uber. It's a basket case of regulatory fights that has stemmed from technology. It has grown so fast that in any of the countries, the taxi industry, they weren't able to adapt. In certain cases, they blocked it. In certain cases, they partnered with it. In certain cases, Uber just killed the taxi industry. But at the end of the day, there is a balance, and you need to be on the right side of that balance.
Exactly. Like you said, also it stirred a lot of conversation here in Germany. But I know in Turkey too, the conversation is still ongoing. I mean, the decision is made, but still people are trying
Exactly.
to
And
turn
these
it back.
decisions, Elif, always are open to change, right? None of the decisions in any of the society, these, societies could be very democratic, less democratic, authoritarian democracies, whatever. There's always room for lobbying. There's always room for change. So you should always, and this change obviously could be on the positive side of your business or on the negative side of your business. So you should always be keeping the risks, monitoring the risks, and pushing for positive change.
Yeah, if the societies change, obviously, like the art of lobbying changes as well. Nowadays democracy
Exactly,
and everything else is so fluid. So I can assume
exactly,
that has a direct.
exactly, exactly.
I see. And so basically, it is about building a bridge, to the regulators, between the regulators and entrepreneurs, and having connections to the regulators, which actually means that you have, like, as a lobbyist, you have, connection, and human relations is at the heart of your
Yes,
business, right? Then I
exactly.
think you must have I mean, I know it from my own experience, but you have a very good network, a very solid network.
Yes, and that comes from your life story. Obviously, you can't build a network just for the sake of building a network. That doesn't work. Actually, as a good lobbyist, you have to have a number of different experiences and skills on your resume. I would say, for example, I worked for the government of Turkey at the competition authority at the president's office. Then I worked for the Union of Chambers and their think tank. So I was actually in the business, lobbying world. Then I worked for a corporate GE, and then I started this business. So, and I always kept a very close touch with the technology ecosystem, the venture capital funds, etc. So you actually bring these networks together, and what I mean. The essence of lobbying is, as you said, information exchange. You actually educate the public officials on the business models and technology, in my case, and the business people on how the government works, what the priorities of these decision makers are, how does the priorities of politicians change as opposed to the priorities of the bureaucrats, which are generally different from each other because one is a career thing, right? The other is based on the election cycles. Uh, how does these cycles work? What are the legislative cycles? How can you get on top of the agenda or avoid being on top of the agenda? How can you get the attention of policymakers or avoid, sometimes much better, avoid the attention of the policymakers? These are all skills that you develop along the way, and all these networks, and obviously your knowledge brings a lot of positive value. I think knowledge is very important, and integrity, I would say, because at the end of the day, when you are conveying the messages of business, you should also, I mean, the other side, the public, should trust you, right? And vice versa. When you are conveying the messages of the public to the business, they should also trust you. So your integrity is sometimes very important.
That's true. And I know from personal experience, again, that you're also an expert in history and cultures as well. Was this a conscious decision? What did this push you towards
No,
this
I
direction,
think
or was it the
no,
other way around?
I think these things kind of happen naturally, organically, right? I mean, some personal interests along the time brings you a professional edge. Some professional connections become personal friends. In my case, there are a lot. Some school friends become professional connections. This is a very fluid dynamic, and I think if you are doing this type of a business, it's very hard to separate what is private, what is business. All these words somehow intersect with each other, and you have to accept that.
It's true. I mean, I know in your case that you have some brand name schools on your resume, like Harvard and Middle East Technical University in Ankara. And I mean, that's, of course, a great place to start for networking. But what about the people that don't have these brand name, schools on their resumes? Like, how can they start
That's a very good
networking?
question. That's a very good question. Look, if I were like 20 years ago, which I was, at some point in my life, I would suggest everyone to start their career. I'm talking about Turkey, but I think it's the same in many European countries. Starting your career in a large institution is very important because large institutions bring you opportunity to meet your peers, right, as well as your bosses, who are abundant in number, and learn from them. And also, your peers will grow with you, right? As you mature in business, they will also come to different positions. And these relationships that you establish in action, I mean, by doing business together, are generally good because these people also know your ethics, you know your approaches. It's different than talking to people in a conference. So I think working in large organizations, and especially public organizations, is a big plus. They also teach you a lot. It's very hard if you want to do this thing, if you never worked in a government. It's very hard to understand the dynamics there, right? Because at the end of the day, those people have their priorities. It's better to live that for a while and experience. And the good thing is, most of these institutions, especially the government institutions, but also banks, etc., those large institutions, they admit people with written exams. So even if you are not you're not from a very brand name school, you can enter these institutions if you perform well in the exam. So then that kind of erases your previous history, right? And you make a new start, and you can take it from there. So to everyone, I suggest starting your career in a large company or a public department where you can build many relationships.
And I understand that you were also proactive. So this also comes hand in hand. So of course you're in a large organization, but you don't stand still. So you probably invite people to coffee for lunch and
yes,
this sort of thing, right?
I think obviously, I'm a bit entrepreneurial. I never stayed, more than 5 years in any job. This is what I'm doing now is my longest, stay because it's my company now. I can't leave. So I was a bit, jumping from things to things. Not everyone has to do this, right? For some people, stability is more important. You can also grow within an organization. That's something very valuable. But even for that, as you said, you have to be proactive, right? You have to meet people in your organization and outside. And you should always keep an eye on the opportunities outside. What I experienced is that maybe not in the government, but in the corporate world, the outside opportunities also bring you inside opportunities. When you say, oh, I have a good job offer, they suddenly offer you a better position to keep you. So it's always good to be in the market. And even now, I always check if I was in the corporate position, what would I get? And I benchmark my, financial level with those positions and check if I'm doing well or not.
Absolutely. And going back to lobbying, let's say I'm an entrepreneur who is and I'm building like a new product, especially in financial services or health, right? So that's regulated. Or I'm in a big organization, like you said, and we have never done lobbying before because we know our industry and it's been going according to plan. However, we just decided to diversify our product portfolio, service portfolio, and decided to enter like financial services, or decided to integrate different softwares into our value proposition. So when is a good time to start? So whenever the idea just falls on our lap, or when should we ideally start lobbying to make use of it?
Exactly. The best time is yesterday, because I think this is an evolving process, and you should at least monitor the situation with regards to your industry, know the stakeholders, and learn their insights. This is the first step. The second step is, of course, conveying your thoughts, maybe producing a thought leadership, a publication, an impact analysis, etc., and explain your value to the policymakers. But I think for the first stage, you shouldn't wait at all. Of course, you can do this as a company in a number of ways. You can work with an outside consultant. You can build an in-house department. You can hire a person. You can do both, actually. In my clients, I also help them hiring people. Some of them don't hire. It also depends on the size of the company, obviously. Some of them, if they are, multinational companies, they have one centralized person in the region who looks after a number of countries. But if it's a local company, sometimes they hire one person for this. But I think, the best time to start is always yesterday. It is also important, I think, to distinguish between a number of services. some companies don't understand the difference between legal services and lobbying. Actually, they are very different because, by the nature of the profession, lawyers are authorized to tell you what is feasible, right? What is legally feasible? What conforms to the existing laws? What we tell them is how can we change those laws? What should we do about that? So these are actually completely contradictory businesses, but some people don't really get this. So people also should be aware of this fact.
That's true. I mean, as early as possible, especially when you're in tech. However, there's also the fear that, if you contact the regulator too early, like especially in risk-averse countries like Germany or
Yes.
Austria, then the regulator might, set its eyes on you, and
Exactly.
So how do you balance that?
A good consultant always tells when to contact the regulator. The more you can stay under the radar, the better, obviously. Unless you are explicitly violating a law. If you are in the gray area, the more you can stay under the radar, I think it's always the better, especially, as you said, in the continental European culture where, everything is written in the law and, you have to get permission for everything, as opposed to English in the, Anglo-Saxon world. Is much more flexible, right? I think in our countries, it's much better to know when to contact the regulator, but that doesn't mean you are not lobbying. You know what you are doing, and that's very important. If you are doing that strategically, that's very good.
Indeed, I mean, it also comes with, of course, looking into the the regulatory framework that that your business is in, right? I mean, what we see with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they actually delegate this to their intern, who is just checking a bit on internet, googling, in other words, and then not talking to a lawyer. Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
so
they should always talk to a lawyer.
Mistakes. I mean, this is if you spend 2 hours with someone who knows what they are talking about, that's enough, right? And it's neither too expensive nor too time consuming. But this is something that the entrepreneurs should, start doing at the very first days of their business, establishing their business.
It's money well spent.
Exactly. Exactly.
Indeed. And how do you find the right lobbying organization in countries like the US or Germany, where you have like different organizations or different authorities, regulating?
Yes. So in our countries, in the continental Europe, it's mostly done. There are 2 ways of doing this, right? Direct lobbying, as I said, directly communicating with the policymakers, but a lot of in the continental Europe, a lot of it's done through business organizations. But these organizations also have their problems. Obviously, some of them are membership based, some of them are not, etc. But they always there are 2 issues. I think one is they always represent the smallest common denominator of the interests of their businesses, which may not necessarily be your interest, right? And second, whoever spends more time there actually leads the agenda. So if you're not spending enough time, then someone else's agenda may be represented more, and this always happens if you are not prepared for the meetings, etc. So this is tricky. You have to know which outlet is the best for you, and you have to drive the agenda. So choosing the outlet and driving the agenda are important. Sometimes, if the industry gets large enough, or if your interest gets large enough, you can also establish new organizations, right? So there are different strategies.
That's true. I mean, as you know, in the States, you have to get a separate payment license in every, state, which has been, a problem throughout, throughout the last 10 years of the tech development. And when Twitter, so X, basically entered the space and started complaining that, this is so hard to get like, a state-based license and then to convert it, then all of a sudden, the regulators started discussing, changing and getting like a unified license. So
exactly, and in the EU, you can actually get from one country, one member, and use it in other member states, right?
Passporting,
so it's complete, financial passport. So it's completely different. So all of these things, I mean, in the US, many things are so local. Even car dealership regulations are local, right? Whereas in Europe, it is becoming much more centralized. Or through the passporting, you can do with one member state and then expand quickly. In the case of Turkey, it's very centralized, obviously, with the exception of a few things. For example, I was very impressed. One of my clients is in this taxi hailing business. Those licenses are given by the municipalities, but that's the only thing that you would ever go to a municipality. Everything else is very centralized. Of course, I think in all of these cases, the regulator capacity is also very important, right? Sometimes you have a regulator, but they don't know, right? There is no capacity. That's the problem then. They can't process, they don't understand what you say. So I think, working with a regulator that is strict but has a lot of capacity is generally much better than a very, relaxed regulator that doesn't understand what you're talking about. Then you can't really communicate. That's the problem.
It's true. We actually had some really flexible European regulators that were very open to new businesses, but then, after their doors got knocked like a million times, exactly. Now they're not so welcoming anymore. So yeah, like you said,
that's the other thing. I think sometimes both the politicians as well as the regulators are too reactionary. So it may go well, and you can do your business. You can stay under the radar for a while, and then suddenly it's bad. So that's the worst case scenario. The good thing is slowly communicating and improving the regulatory environment.
Mm-hmm. And going back one step, you were talking about Turkey. So since you're, an expert in the Turkish market, how can foreign, companies, crypto companies, fintech companies, or tech companies enter the Turkish market? What are the challenges and what are the, advantages of the Turkish market? Can you talk?
I think, very good question. I think so. When I talk to people in Europe or in the Middle East, of course, everyone knows the commercial potential of Turkey, right? It's a very large market. At least there are a lot of people, right? Even if
very
they are
digital.
not super rich, very digital, and relatively speaking, compared to Europe, still young. So that's an important point. But they are very much concerned about uncertainties, regulatory uncertainties, political uncertainties. Honestly speaking, obviously there are a lot of uncertainties in Turkey, but that's the case for many other countries. Go to the UK. It's the same, right? Many European countries, it's similar. Brussels itself is extremely uncertain, and recent times, I think, very anti-business, right? My friends who are doing lobbying in Brussels are having very hard time. Political polarization is the same in Turkey and in Europe. So I think also, foreign businesses should not be very afraid of the environment in Turkey. So long as they gather the right information, and in certain industries maybe have the right local partners, that's also an advantage, right? Especially in finance, etc., where it is more regulated. It brings flexibility to you. If you have the right partners and the right, people to do business with, I think it's not very much different from any other, emerging European country in terms of the technology regulation, etc. So I wouldn't be too much afraid, but I wouldn't be too much relaxed either. You should always be very diligent and find your way.
And say inshallah, which is our way of facing uncertainty. Indeed. I guess what you're referring to about, certainty is especially due to the very clear regulatory agenda of the European regulator. So you can very clearly see what they're working on, what they will be working on, what is certain, what is not certain, what is, up for grabs. And that gives some kind of a relaxation especially to entrepreneurs, because you can see what they're working on, you can comment on it, you can also
Yes,
approach the
it's
regulator
much
and
more
say,
transparent processes, I would say.
exactly.
Yes.
Whereas in Turkey, I mean, it's also self-critic. Of course, things can be more business, oriented, but then things can also happen from one day to another. So when you're
Exactly.
expecting release.
It's not as institutional as it is in Brussels or any Central European country. But look, I mean, Europeans get a lot of views, right? They do impact assessments, for all the regulations. Do all these meetings to discuss the regulations. But at the end of the day, the bureaucrats in Brussels want do what they want to do. You can't really have too much impact, especially these days. In the recent few years, that's what I see. And so, at the end of the day, I wouldn't mind doing business in Turkey, despite of all these uncertainties.
So you're basically saying the flexibility and the accessibility is making
Sometimes
it more
good.
attractive. Is sometimes good.
Exactly. Exactly.
And what would be the disadvantages of entering the
As you
Turkish market?
said, things may change quickly, right? There is this opaqueness. I mean, it's not like China where everything is opaque. I mean, in China, no law is written in a precise way. The regulators always have a lot of leeway to, in how they understand the laws. That's not like that in Turkey. It's more French-German style. That being said, there can be abrupt changes, etc. You should always be ready to, you are taking more risk at the end of the day, but that also brings more reward.
Mm-hmm. And what other things can entrepreneurs and tech companies consider when entering Turkey? Of course, they contact you. And what else?
First thing.
What else?
But I think sometimes in some businesses, especially if you are going to B2C, having a right partner as a channel is always good, because I mean, if you are having a partner in a small country, let's say, that may bring you a lot of dead weight loss, because it's a small country. But if you establish a right structure in Turkey, there is a large way to grow. So having the right partnerships is important, and obviously having the right consultants, as you said, wouldn't hurt.
Can you give an example when it comes to partners, B2C partnerships?
So all types of fintech businesses, I would say. It's more B2B2C now, right? As you said, healthcare, or especially digital health, I would say, which is very big and emerging. If you have the right partners on the ground, you can grow much faster, and you can also be on the safe side of the things, take less risk.
Understood. And speaking of opportunities and regulations, can we also talk a bit about AI before closing the session?
Sure.
So, that is the hot agenda, when it comes to
Yes.
regulations. Like, there is an EU AI Act.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this? Like, what kind of opportunities does it
So
bring to entrepreneurs?
I find EU's approach to all types of regulations, but in particular in AI, since we are not leading the world in technology, let's lead the world in regulation to match what Americans doing. We'll see if it will work or not in the longer horizon. But I think comparing Turkey to the EU, we have this tendency of adopting all the EU regulations to Turkey. But I think in the upcoming years, Turkey will also see, just like the UK did, not adopting some EU regulations may also bring you more benefit and regulator arbitrage to attract more businesses. And we will increasingly be doing that, I believe. So, for example, in the AI regulations, why would we do that? We can design more flexible regulations for ourselves and maybe attract more investment. So we'll see. I think the policymakers are having this mindset increasingly, but we are yet to see to what extent the regulatory adoption process in Turkey will closely follow Turkey or not, EU or not.
And I mean, you work a lot with Middle East, with Europe. So, what are your trend predictions? And of course, I mean, we are a bit into the year, but still,
Sure.
it didn't, progress
I
yet.
think the Middle East, I mean, talking about Middle East, mostly Gulf and Saudi these days, they are, very much ahead of the curve. Of course, they have obvious regulatory advantages because they are not democracies, nor they pretend to do so, to be so. They can act faster on many things. They can establish all these regulatory sandboxes, invite, cutting edge businesses. They obviously have money to invest into them. And that's how, on one hand, Dubai, on the other hand, now Saudi is emerging as tech hubs. And I think there are real things going on there. It's not only the showbiz of it. There are real businesses and it will grow. I think Turkey has been performing under its potential for the last few years. I hope and I believe in the second half of this year and going forward to next year, there will be more European interest in terms of technology in Turkey as well. I mean, at the end of the day, Poland did so good, right? It's an amazing story. We were at the same, technology development level maybe 15 years ago. Now Poland is doing much better than Turkey, but we have the same material at the end of the day. And I think as the returns in Europe fall, because the opportunities are exhausted, more funds and more know-how will flow to Turkey. If we can also enjoy certain regulatory arbitrages, that will even bring more benefit. That's my trend analysis and predictions.
Great analysis. And last question. Who do you think will win, or who do you think will proceed more this year when we talk about the technology war between China, Europe, and the US?
That's a very good question. I think, look, this war is also, I mean, of course, there is a war, right? But I also think Chinese are happy with their own market, right? Other than TikTok, there are not really big Chinese, technology companies, at least digital internet companies. There's also infrastructure companies, but digital companies that are growing, right? So Chinese are happy in their own world, so long as we don't, or the Western world doesn't intervene. So I think, the tensions will be lower in the future. I'm very optimistic about that. And in between US and Europe, obviously US is leading.
The technology side of things.
Technology side, yes.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to discuss all these longer, but I guess there's a party, that's happening.
Exactly, there's a party starting, so maybe we should. Maybe we should
move to that. Yeah, indeed. So I don't want to, keep you from this party. I mean, joke aside, thank you very much for these, for the insights and, for your open and honest feedback. I think it was very useful, at least for me, but I bet also for all the people that tuned in today. It was great to have you, Ussal. Thanks a lot. And
thanks
I'm sure
to our audience and Elif. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
See you, Ussal. Thank you.
Cheers.